The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll continue now with a reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by Protestant historian James Aitken Wiley. Remember last time we were talking about the initial establishment of the Roman Catholic Defense Association. And this was in response to England establishing the Ecclesiastical Titles Act, which was a response to the Pope issuing a cardinal to come to England and divide up the land into dioceses and appoint a bishop over each and take on the role of temporal governors of all the dioceses. It was a hostile takeover of the government. And even Roman Catholic periodicals were claiming that the civil laws of England, both those laws of Parliament and the decrees of the Queen, were not laws but lies, and that the only legitimate law was Roman Catholic canon law. And they sought by process, by organized strategic processes, to make the government of England step down and let the Pope be the king of England. Now, James A. Wiley is telling us about this Dr. Cullen and several other Roman Catholic parishioners who associated themselves under a title of the Catholic Defense Association and began to take on the battle against the government. And it says on page 115, if you're following along in your online copy of the book, and by the way, this is on Google Books, just go to Google Books and type in the title, Rome and Civil Liberty, and by James A. Wiley, and you can read right along with us. This is page 115, the first full paragraph on the page. It says, Dr. Cullen came forward bemoaning the hard necessity which had driven him upon such a demonstration, that is, to organize a Catholic Defense Association. He says the good man was in utter astonishment at the persecution which had befallen his church, and which was unprovoked as it was fearful. The Catholics of the empire were living in peace and amity with all men when this tempest of Protestant wrath had gathered and burst. What, exclaimed the astonished primate, what have we done? There was no one present to remind him of the bull of a foreign potentate. Okay, this was the papal bull that made Dr. Wiseman the cardinal, and it was the papal bull that authorized him to divide up England into dioceses and appoint a bishop over each to become the new temporal rulers of everyone in those dioceses. Okay, he says ignoring this papal bull, which ignored directly the ecclesiastical and virtually the temporal supremacy of the British crown and the nation's independence. And so the primate had to rely on his own question. Okay, there were no Protestants available at this meeting to tell these Roman Catholics why the Ecclesiastical Titles Act was written. Okay? This is all pretending that Rome had made no aggression on England. And this is the mentality that surrounded this organization, this new organization, the Catholic Defense Association. Quote, I say the Catholics of this empire have done nothing to bring about the present state of things. They have been forced into the attitude which they have assumed. They never imagined that they were committing any aggression or invading anyone's right. They were violating no law, injuring no one, unquote. The Catholics aimed simply at ruling, this is James A. Wiley speaking now, he says the Catholics aimed simply at ruling Britain by canon law. A most innocent and lawful object, they would have us believe. And as necessary as it is innocent, seeing it is, quote, the complete code of the church, unquote, and rules all her members in temporals as well as spirituals. This law, it is true, declares Protestantism to be heresy, and its just and customary punishment, death by burning. And to administer this law, two little adjuncts may be required in the shape of the confessional and the Inquisition, to extort Protestant secrets and rack Protestant joints. But then, as Dr. Cullen held, the power to carry out their pet law in their own peculiar way is simple toleration. And this toleration the British nation, to his astonishment and grief, had refused. For the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill was, he averred, a hindrance in the way the Church exercising her whole discipline, which extends to every act of the Romanist as a citizen as well as a church member, and so the hard necessity had been put upon them to form the Catholic Defense Association. So there's the choices. According to the Catholic Defense Association, England will be Catholic, its legitimate government will be overthrown, the Pope will be the governor of the country under Roman Catholic canon law, every subject of Britain will obey the Pope. Okay? And the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill, all it did was prevent these bishops, which the Pope put upon the country, could not take temporal titles, such as Bishop of Westminster. Okay? They couldn't claim territory. They couldn't claim temporal jurisdiction. That's all the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill forbade. They knew Rome's history. They knew what purpose these dioceses were to perform. That is, to make Roman Catholic canon law, the law of the land. And the bishops were simply to be governors over their dioceses, temporal rulers. And so the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill made one small step in that direction, and now we have a Roman Catholic Defense League, and nobody in the Roman Catholic Defense League will even acknowledge the aggression that the papacy and Cardinal Wiseman and his bishops had put upon the nation. Never did they mention the official Roman Catholic periodicals published at that time were saying that the laws of Parliament and the decrees of the Queen were not laws but lies, and they were not to only not be obeyed, but they were to be spit upon. And the Roman Catholics are claiming that they're being religiously persecuted. When Roman Catholic canon law establishes that anyone not a Roman Catholic is a heretic, and the just treatment of heretics is to be burned at the stake or stretched on the rack. You see how one-sided the Pope is? How one-sided his Roman Catholic followers are? No reason prevails when you're in a dispute with Roman Catholics. That's why we're not to negotiate with them. That's why we're not to have any part with them, but to rebuke them. Okay? You open up a dialogue with Rome, you're going to lose, because no reason, no justice follows their argument. Okay? They're taught from cradle to grave that the Pope is the replacement of Christ on the earth. And whatever he says goes. And if you give the Roman Catholic an inch, he will stand by for a mile until he has totally put you into subjection. And to the Roman Catholic mind, that's tolerance. Okay? They will not have achieved tolerance of their Roman Catholic faith until they have completely subjugated you to Roman Catholic canon law. Now, it's not just one instance in history where this has taken place. This time in Great Britain is only one of many, many, many examples of this type of aggression by the Roman Catholic Antichrist. Now, he says the principles held by the hierarchy on the toleration due to them and the course of aggression to be followed till their church's rights shall have been fully attained will be most succinctly learned from the resolutions of the assembly, which was as follows. Here's what was resolved at this Catholic Defense Association. Quote, "It is first declared that an act lately passed by the Imperial Parliament, commonly called the Ecclesiastical Titles Act, is a violation of the principle contained in the Catholic Relief Act of 1829 and subversive of the great principle of religious liberty established in this empire. It is next declared, and this time unhesitatingly, quote, that the present ministers have betrayed the cause of civil and religious freedom and forfeited the confidence of the Catholics in the United Kingdom," unquote. It is then resolved, quote, that we hereby solemnly pledge ourselves to use every legitimate means within the Constitution to obtain a total repeal of that act, and every other statute which imposes upon Catholics of the empire any civil or religious disability whatsoever, or precludes them from the enjoyment of a perfect equality with every class of their fellow subjects, unquote. And finally, it is declared, quote, that for the above objects we deem it necessary to establish a Catholic Defense Association, and that the same be and is hereby established. Close all quotes. Now, James A. Wiley says, let it first be noted that they hold that the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill is a flagrant violation of the great principle of toleration. It forbids them, they tell us, the free exercise of their religion. Now, we are unable to form the most distant guess what rite or dogma it is of all those that make up their religion, which the Act prohibits. May they not build a cathedral in every street of every city in the empire? May they not sing Mass in it all day long? May they not observe all the festivals and pray to all the saints in the cathedral on the Catholic calendar? Has their person been stripped of any single gewgaw or their altars of a single candle? Has the discipline of their church, so far as it is spiritual, been meddled with? May they not prescribe to offending members as severe and protracted a penalty as they please? May they not compel them by spiritual terrors to wear a hair shirt or to walk 20 miles with peas in their shoes, or to repeat the Ave Maria or the Pater Noster ad infinitum? May they not shut up whom they please in purgatory and keep them there for a year or 1,000 years with perfect impunity as regards the law? Were the priests of Edinburgh to set up on Calton Hill, or were those of London to exhibit in Trafalgar Square, and we trust they will not, a winking Madonna, would anyone interfere with this foolery provided the peace were kept? And what is more to the point, are the taxes which they impose upon their own people a penny less since the passage of this act? It has not lowered the price of charism or of absolution. Christenings and confirmations still bear the same marketable value. Crucifixes and holy candles are as lucrative a trade as ever. Yes, the priest can gather his dues where the landlord cannot gather his. He can gather his dues where the lawful creditor cannot gather his. He can glean plentifully at the heels of famine, even, he can glean plentifully at the heels of famine even, and gather among graves and corpses, compelling the ghastly arm of the dead man to contribute towards filling his purse. Okay, this is a reference to, the ambulance chaser is the Roman Catholic priest. He's the one who has to give last rites, and he's the one who seeks to benefit the most from a dead man's bequeath. And this is what he's referring to. And he says, all this the priests assembled at the Rotundo can do, and yet they clamorously demand the full and free exercise of their religion, and grievously complain that they are lying under intolerable persecution. Now again, I remind you, the Ecclesiastical Titles Act simply prevented the bishops from demanding temporal authority over every man, woman, and child in their diocese, thus overthrowing the legitimate government of the country. Okay? He says, we might be suspected of exaggerating, but the meeting itself surely can lie under no such suspicion. Therefore, we shall permit it to state in its own words the objects it bound itself to pursue. Let the reader mark that the concessions which follow, and which were to be fought for and carried, are styled the temporal rights of Romanists. Here's a quote. Quote, as citizens, therefore, say the meeting, and on the temporal side of the question only, we can conceive but one object for a Catholic Defense Society, and that is to root out every law and every administrative practice which interferes with the perfect freedom of the Church. That's the Roman Catholic Church, and our perfect equality before the law. What are these laws and what are these practices? Of course, the the Ecclesiastical Titles Act is one of them. Upon that item of the account, we need not enlarge. Quote, another is the existence of the established church, not in its religious character, but as a favored corporation. Its unjust possession of titles and glebes, acquired by robbery and retained by fraud and bloodshed. The legislative and political authority conferred on its so-called bishops, and whatever else belongs to its temporal character as an establishment. Okay? Another quote. Another set of cases is the penal laws directed against the Jesuits and other religious orders. Those odious enactments which make, quote, the greatest benefactors to religion and humanity felons for rendering the truest services to God and to their neighbor. Another quote. Another is the exceptions in the Emancipation Act, which debar Catholics from the highest offices in the legal profession. The existing Regency Act, which, in the event of the Queen dying while her heir is under 18 years of age, requires the regent to be a Protestant, compels Prince Albert to take the oath of supremacy or to forfeit his claim to the regency, and forbids him either to become a Catholic or marry a Catholic. And finally, the Coronation Oath and the Act of Settlement, which limit possession of the crown to Protestants and make the conversion to genuine Christianity a forfeiture of title, unquote. Now he says other points are enumerated, such as chaplains in the workhouses and chaplains in the Army and the Navy. War was also proclaimed against the government college in Ireland, and the manifesto was concluded with the intimation that the meeting would not rest satisfied until their church had obtained, quote, the free exercise and development of its power, its faith, and its morals. Okay? We talked about morals, didn't we? And he said that is, the priest will account that they have obtained their temporal rights only when released from the laws of the country. They are permitted to wield over their followers the whole disciplinary powers of canon law. Okay, this is what it's going to take to appease these Roman Catholics. Roman Catholic canon law replaces the legitimate government of England. And no more claim to Protestantism in the country. Okay? I don't see how any listener can view this as anything but the abject establishment of Roman Catholic canon law over the entire British Empire, particularly England and Scotland, which were Protestant. Okay? Quoting further, it says, such are a few of the objects to which the Catholic Defense Association or the Catholic Defense Society must direct its attention and its best energies. And we repeat that in our judgment as laymen, the Catholic Defense Society must include amongst its objects everything which is included in the perfect independence of the Church, the free exercise and development of its powers, its faith and its morals, and the perfect equality before the law of all the members of the Church with the members of every other community. With nothing less than this are we, in our character as citizens, disposed to be content, unquote. Now, James A. Wiley says, in the absence of anything like argument in the speeches delivered at the meeting, we turn to the tablet of that day. The tablet lays it down as an axiom that a man's temporal rights and the rights of his church are identical, or at least coexistive. Quote, the rights of my church, unquote, says he, quote, let me be of what religion I please, and apart altogether from their divine sanction, are as much my temporal rights as the enjoyment of my franchise or the possession of my house, unquote. This is a definition of temporal rights which will carry the Romanists very far indeed. The commonly received doctrine of mankind has hitherto been that a man's temporal rights are limited by the just prerogatives of the government under which he lives and by the rights of his fellow subjects. The members of the Roman Catholic Church utterly ignore this doctrine. Their rights, they hold, can be limited by no powers of the British Constitution and no claims of their Protestant fellow subjects. The Romanist knows no limits to his temporal rights but those which the decrees of his church have set. Every claim which his church has at any time put forth is as indisputably his temporal right as is his franchise or his house. And he holds, moreover, that he is bound as a church member and entitled as a citizen to agitate in every way till he shall obtain every particle of these rights. Where then can one learn the rights of their church, and so know when this controversy may be expected to end, and what extent of concession Romanists would be pleased to accept as toleration? Whatever the canon law teaches is part of the rights of the church, and by consequence, part of the temporal rights of the Romanist. And when he has succeeded at the expense of the annihilation of the rights of all other men in securing the privileges with which the canon law invests at once the corporal body and the individual papists, then and only then will he will grant that he is tolerated. So do you understand? Roman Catholic rights are not fully achieved until Roman Catholic canon law becomes the law of the land over every man, woman, and child. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the program, please support First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now, whatever the canon law teaches is part of the rights of the church, and by consequence, part of the rights, the temporal rights of the Roman Catholic. Okay? That's the law. The canon law, whatever the canon law teaches, is part of the rights of the church, and by consequence, part of the temporal rights of the Catholic. And when he has succeeded at the expense of the annihilation of the rights of all other men in securing the privileges with which the canon law invests at once the corporate body, that is the church, and the individual papist, every individual Roman Catholic, then and only then will the Roman Catholic admit that he is tolerated. So toleration to a Roman Catholic, religious toleration of a Roman Catholic, means to the Roman Catholic that they have the right to strip you of all your rights, because your rights only come from the Pope. You are in error if you think your rights come from the Bible. You are in error if you think your rights come from the Constitution. Your rights come from the papacy. And if you are not a Roman Catholic, you're a heretic and you have no rights. And the Roman Catholic Church, to be fully free to practice its religion, can burn a heretic at the stake or to stretch him on the rack and confiscate his property and his children and all that he owns. And until England or the United States submit to that Roman Catholic canon law, it has not tolerated Roman Catholicism. I don't see how I could make the point better. Unless you submit completely to Roman Catholic canon law and all that it prescribes for you, then you have not been tolerant of Roman Catholicism. As long as you insist the Constitution has the weight of a feather in your country, you have not been tolerant of Roman Catholicism. To the degree that the civil authorities prevent the ecclesiastical tribunals from convicting you as a heretic, putting you in prison, and torturing you until you submit to Roman Catholic canon law and the Pope's authority, you have not tolerated Roman Catholicism. Until you submit to the authority of the priest and confess your sins in his ear and obtain from him absolution for your sins, you have not tolerated Roman Catholicism. To the degree that you believe the wafer served at the Mass is not the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, but a blasphemous fraud, you have not tolerated Roman Catholicism. Am I making the point? To the degree that the civil courts of the land adjudicate laws not written by the Pope, you have not tolerated Roman Catholicism. To the degree that any law of the land contradicts Roman Catholic canon law or in any way diminishes the temporal and spiritual power of the Pope, you have not tolerated Roman Catholicism. Now, what is Roman Catholic canon law? Is it something that we should reject? He says, well then, the canon law teaches that a papal rescript, that is anything written by the Pope, is of superior force to either an act of parliament or a royal edict. And that when the spiritual sovereign of Christendom speaks through his legate, when the Pope speaks through his representative or through his missive, it becomes kings and parliaments to be as dumb as the dog in his presence. Okay? Little embellishment there on my part, but completely are to be subject to the Pope. When the Pope speaks, the Queen and the Parliament must shut up. Okay? I'll read it again, just as it's written this time. Well, then, the canon law teaches that a papal rescript is of superior force to either an act of parliament or a royal edict, and that when the spiritual sovereign of Christendom speaks through his legate or through his missive, it becomes kings and parliaments to be dumb in his presence. Laws made against that will, the will of the Pope, are not laws but lies. They are not to be obeyed. They are to be spit upon. This is the sum of the Roman Catholic Church rights on the head of authority, which the Romanists of Britain conceive they are entitled to demand as part of their temporal rights, and to obtain which they have ever since 1829 been carrying on a system of agitation and clamor. Rome will never stop. A devout, learned, and dedicated Roman Catholic will never cease to overthrow any and every government except that of the Pope. It will seek to overthrow every law that does not originate or is co-signed by the Pope. That's ancient Roman Catholicism. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it always will be. So any devout Roman Catholic in your government is actively serving the Pope by making laws commensurate with Roman Catholic canon law and submitting all of its laws to the authority of the papacy. Now, does that cause you to look at the civil laws of this country any differently than it did before? They're making you, without your knowledge, a subject of the Roman Pontiff. The established political system in this country kowtows to the papacy. That's not a blind assertion. That comes from the very lips of the previous author that we read on Inquisition Update. A devout Roman Catholic, a Knight of Malta, Francis Rooney, who served under George W. Bush as an ambassador to the Holy See, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. And he not only admitted that this is true, he boasted about it. The United States cannot call itself a Christian nation until it is wholly subject to the Roman Pontiff and Roman Catholic canon law. And that's why you see so much Roman Catholic involvement, the Vatican's involvement in the United States State Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Congress, the congressional representatives and senators who are held by Roman Catholics. This is the purpose of the Jesuit universities in this country, to raise up the intellectual cream of the Roman Catholic crop and put them in the highest offices of our land, to make our laws conform to Roman Catholic canon law, to make you a subject of the Roman Pontiff, to obey his laws, Roman Catholic canon law. This is why Inquisition Update says there should not a Catholic sit on any governing body. If you value your nation's independence, if you value your liberties, your Protestant liberties, if you value the Bible and the sole authority of Jesus Christ over your life, then you should never vote for a Catholic, no matter how congenial, no matter how beautiful, no matter how eloquent, no matter how apparently Protestant he is a servant of the Pope, and he will do the Pope's will, and he will force you to do his will, or he faces ecclesiastical sanction from his church, which includes excommunication and eternal damnation. And it's all the better that you should never know these things. And it's even more better that you should believe that Islam is trying to take over this country. And we wouldn't have to be told any of these things were we diligent in our Protestant faith. Were we diligent to know our Protestant history? Were we diligent to know what is the Roman Catholic Church? What is the pontiff? This pretentious little man who dresses in a little dress and little red shoes that parades around the world as the moral authority of the world and proclaiming himself to be the representative of Jesus Christ and the spokesman of all Christendom? Why do we let this stuff go in one ear and out the other as though it doesn't matter? It only matters once you realize how much power and authority and control he has over the governments of the world and even the global government, the United Nations. Francis Rooney clearly covered his high and supreme status as a permanent observer over the United Nations. That means he owns it. It's his institution. Now, many of us already know that the national sovereignty of the United States has been gobbled up by the United Nations. That our government in Washington, D.C. is really just a public figurehead. The real power comes from the UN. But we wouldn't dare suggest that the Pope is the head of the UN. That would be absurd to most people's minds. But that is in fact the case. The beast that received the mortal wound at the time of the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution is alive and well again, and growing by leaps and bounds. And little of that growing by leaps and bounds could have happened without the help of once Protestant USA. Do you see how much of which we need to repent? Do you see how desperate it is that we get the message out to God's people in this country? What authority the papacy has reclaimed over this country and the world? Do you see how important it is to know who the Antichrist is and his machinations in the world? Do you see what a grievous error futurism is? And its twin sister, the ecumenical movement? He says, but again, the canon law teaches that lands and possessions once the property of the Roman Catholic Church are the Roman Catholic Church's property forever. No length of time, no authority on earth, not even that of the pontiff, can alienate those lands or render them other than sacred. Here's another part of the papist temporal rights. The enormity of the laws may be supposed to have repealed it, but it is not so. Every inch of land in Great Britain and Ireland, which at any former period may have belonged to the Roman Catholic Church, is her property still. Did you realize at one time half of the tillable land in England once belonged to the Pope through deathbed bequeathals to the Church? How's England to feed itself if Rome claims all the land that she claims is hers? That's part of the reason why Rome was overthrown in Britain in the first place. Rome owned all the land and took all the proceeds and left the people to starve. Is that Christian charity? Could that be called Christianity? Every piece of land that the Roman Catholic Church ever claimed ownership of is hers today. That's according to Roman Catholic canon law. He says the administration of all revenues and lands devoted to ecclesiastical uses, that is church uses, the canon law hands over to the ecclesiastical tribunals, and it permits the same tribunals only to try ecclesiastical persons, be the misdemeanors of which they are guilty what they may. All right? So the Roman Catholic Church takes on the single sole responsibility of administering justice to her priests. The civil power has absolutely no jurisdiction over the priests. And that's why the pedophile priest scandal keeps going on and on and on. The prisons and jails are not full of Roman Catholic priests. They are handled strictly by the Pope. And whatever justice he metes out to his priests, that should satisfy the world. And we should not question how the Pope decides in those matters. Your children, debauched as they were by the Roman Catholic priest, have no rights. You have no claim to remuneration, no claim to restoration, no claim to healing. The Pope decides in all these matters, and his main objective is to protect the assets of the church. Peter's patrimony. So your children just become the sexual slaves of the priests. And the priest, if he gets caught, and enough people find out about it, gets moved to another diocese to prey on little children more. How long is the world going to tolerate this? How long before our senses are finally shocked into the reality that it's the same today as it was in the dark days of the old world order, when the priests were absolutely sacrosanct, when they were untouchable by the civil powers, and when their debauchery and their sinfulness became intolerable. We're returning to those days. The New World Order is simply the Old World Order restored. Hands off. You can't touch the priest. He may touch every aspect of your life on pain of excommunication and eternal damnation for failure to obey him. But if he touches one of your sons, you have nothing to say. That's what the message came from, the quote that says, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church from the Pope on down is absolutely corrupt. And the world simply tolerates the criminality of the Roman Catholic priesthood and is unable to bring the Pope and his defenders and his fellow pedophiles to a world court, because no court in the world has jurisdiction over them. They are immune and sacrosanct. They are as gods in this world. And the world remains silent about it. There ought to be a revolution by morning. He says no matter what their misdemeanors are, they can commit whatever sin, whatever crime they wish. They are only subject to Roman Catholic tribunals, the Pope. He says this is another constituent element in the Romans' temporal rights and in the toleration of his church. To the degree that you have not remained silent against the sins of the priests of the Roman Catholic Church, you have not been tolerant of the Roman Catholic religion. And Roman Catholicism will never stop until it is fully tolerated. That means you will become an abject slave and a subject to the Roman Pontiff, and you will accept his rule and reign and Roman Catholic canon law without quibble. And only then will it be considered that you were tolerant of Roman Catholicism. He says, but not to multiply instances, the canon law teaches that there is but one religion in the world, the Roman Catholic, that all opinions and practices contrary to it are heretical and lie under anathema, and that the just punishment for those who refuse to renounce heresy is death. This is what the Romanist individuals demand by rights. Give him all this, and you have given him toleration. Erase every law which is opposed to the dominancy of his church, restore to the priesthood half the lands of the kingdom, declare the Romish clergy exempt from all lay tribunals, all civil law, and confess that theirs is the only true church, that you are but a poor heretic, and that the Romanist has a perfect right to lock you up in his inquisition and to make a public auto de fe of you, and he will then acknowledge that you have tolerated him. Toleration, in the vocabulary of the Roman Catholic, just means power to ignore all laws contrary to those of the Romish Church, and liberty to imprison and burn all who do not believe as the Church believes. To obtain this equality of temporal rights, this religious toleration, the tablet threatened renewed, determined, and ceaseless agitation, and specified the various objects which the Catholic Defense Association must bend its whole power to carry. First, the Ecclesiastical Titles Act must be erased from the statute book. A Romanist orator present could find no deed which equaled in atrocity the passing of this act, save one that took place 1,800 years ago in the capital of Judea, and no tribunal which rivaled in infamy and guilt the parliament which passed it, except for that which Pilate presided. Quote, "This is law," said the orator, "to drive fresh nails into the cross of Christ, to fetter his sacred limbs with new ropes, and to put over his head a new galling inscription, namely, the sacrifice on this cross is illegal by the third clause of the Russell Bill." Oh, what a resemblance, continued the orator, between the present premier with his parliamentary majorities and Pilate with the Jewish rabble. The Jews cried out, "Away with him! Away with him!" The Whigs worship no God in England. Unquote. They equate the Ecclesiastical Titles Bill, which was simply a mild attempt to prevent the bishops from acquiring titles that represent them as official temporal rulers. And they equated it with the crucifixion of Christ. And they equated Parliament for passing this law equivalent to Pilate and the Jewish rabble. Can anybody spell overreaction? Can anybody spell radical fundamentalism? You know, that's the very term Rome is going to use to persecute you who disobey the Pope and disobey this papist government that rules over us, making us Catholic without our consent by the establishment of our laws. they're going to call you a radical fundamentalist. Have you ever seen more radical fundamentalism than in the history of the Roman Catholic Church? The earth is soaked with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus by this rabble in Rome. We'll continue with the reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley on the program tomorrow. Thanks for listening. I'll see you then.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.